If you keep getting bacterial vaginosis, you are told to just do another round of antibiotics or more boric acid suppositories. You are sick and tired of dealing with it, and you know it has to be connected to your fertility struggles. This episode is for you. Hi, I'm Dr. Jane Levesque, and this is the Natural Fertility with Dr. Jane podcast, where we help couples uncover the real reasons behind their fertility struggles. So today, I want to walk you through how we at the clinic actually think about bacterial vaginosis, how to properly identify it, rule out aerobic vaginitis, how to treat it for good, and how it's connected to your fertility. I will use some real-life examples to show you how the treatment actually works. So the main thing that I want you to know is that bacterial vaginosis is not just a vaginal microbiome imbalance. If there is an imbalance in your vaginal microbiome, there are likely other imbalances going on too. Nothing in the body works in isolation, which is why treating just BV without looking at the whole system often fails. The female microbiome hasn't been studied for that long. The last 10 years have been eye-opening, and I believe that the next 10 years will and should absolutely change how we approach and treat things like chronic vaginal infections and how it's connected to fertility. So here's the problem that we are seeing in my clinic all the time. Women are coming in with recurring bacterial vaginosis. They have discharge, they have odor, they have discomfort, itching, burning, and maybe even a smelly period. They have been told to do antibiotics, but now after 2, 3, 5, even as many as 10 rounds, they're still getting recurring infection. They have changed their diet. They started taking a probiotic, so they would take the antibiotics followed by probiotic. They are avoiding sugar, they're avoiding alcohol, they're exercising, sleeping well, managing their stress. And some of them even had their partner treated, but this problem continues to persist and they can't seem to get pregnant. And the conventional doctor says it has nothing to do with their fertility struggles. So let me tell you what the actual issue is with this approach. So the current approach that you have of going on antibiotics for 7, 10, maybe as long as 14 days, and then doing some probiotics after is very oversimplified. Sometimes the partner is not treated at all, which is a huge problem because you essentially are just passing the infection back and forth, and men are often silent carriers. And then no one is looking at other imbalances. They're not looking at the gut, the uterine microbiome, the overall level of inflammation, the blood sugar levels, the nutrient deficiency, the immune system function. None of those things are being looked at. So when you're treating BV in isolation, it's not working. And here's why it's not enough. It ignores the gut-vaginal axis completely. So what's happening in the vaginal microbiome usually is started in your gut and something to do with your environment. We're going to break that down a little bit more later. It also oversimplifies just the microbiome in general and how it works, how it's all interconnected. So when you're treating an infection, it's not as simple as taking those antibiotics followed by probiotics. Most bugs have a really long life cycle over the 7 and 10 days. They're going to be, some of them are 28 days, some of them are a couple of months, if not longer. Then you also have strong biofilms that need to be taken into consideration. And that's something that a lot of practitioners miss. It also means that the mitochondria function needs to be optimized because you need energy to overcome the infection. And when that mitochondrial function is really poor, you simply won't have the nutrients or the energy that the body needs to help get rid of the infection and get rid of it. It does ignore the partner and the sexual hygiene, so then you continue to ping pong the infections back and forth. And then it also ignores your nervous system, your stress, your diet, your history, and everything that's constantly shaping your microbiome. We cannot look at any microbiome in isolation. And like I said, the vaginal microbiome, or just the female reproductive system microbiomes, have not been studied for that long. The gut is the most studied. The vaginal is the next most studied. And when we run those panels in correlation, it's always really helpful to see what else is going on. And I'll show you and I'll talk about all the tests and why it's important to look into it all together and then how it's connected to fertility. So here's your new lens, your new idea. First of all, let's make sure we understand what BV versus AV is. So bacterial vaginosis versus aerobic vaginitis. Those are two different things. They need two different approaches, and we want to make sure we know what it is that we are treating. You want to look at BV and AV as a systemic issue, not just a vaginal issue. Your microbiome, your hormones, your immune system, your nervous system all have to be in the conversation. When one is off, the other has to adapt. Now, when we work on BV in practice, BV or AV, here's what we want to ask. What is happening in your gut, on your skin, in your mind, in your relationship, in your environment, not just what's happening in your vagina? How is this pattern also impacting your fertility and overall resiliency? This is something that we as fertility specialists are always asking ourselves. So let's break down the difference between BV and AV. So bacterial vaginosis, the organisms that are going to be overgrown are the Gardnerella, the Prevotella, the Mambinculus, and the Fusobacterium. These are all anaerobes, which means low oxygen, high pH. So they survive in low oxygen space. The inflammation, I think, is present in both of them. And then there is a connection to the gut in both of them. When we are looking at aerobic vaginitis, this is when you see things like Enterococcus facialis, E. coli, staph, and strep. These are aerobes, meaning they thrive in oxygenated environments. So that should tell you what kind of herbs we're going to use, but also what kind of suppositories we're going to use, vaginal suppositories we're going to use, and which ones we're going to avoid to make sure that we don't make things worse. Now, aerobic vaginitis has almost always indicates leaky gut and gut barrier dysfunction. And when we test the gut, we most certainly see that connection. So testing is critical. We need quantitative data. There's a lot of tests out there that will just give you and say, you have BV, it's a positive. You don't know which bugs, how much they're overgrown, and therefore your treatment is still kind of blindsided because you don't know what you're really up against. You just know that is this a little bit of an imbalance or this is a lot. So we want to understand how much of the microbe imbalance do you actually have, which ones, because it will dictate your protocol. Really high overgrowth in AV will require longer treatments with different herbs. So here's the testing that's non-negotiable for us. We do a vaginal microbiome test that identifies the specific organisms and their relative abundance. We always run a gut microbiome assessment, so that's a stool test, and that essentially we're paying attention to leaky gut markers. We look at zonulin, we'll look at calprotectin, we'll look at LPS, lipopolysaccharides production, especially when we're seeing the Enterococcus and the E. coli in the AV. And there's almost always an imbalance in the gut when you're seeing those. We always assess the male partner. Both partners must be treated for infections. So for male partners, we will test the gut. And now we often test the seminal microbiome as well, because the men can be silent carriers. We will run hormone panels if it's relevant, meaning like a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones or something similar. We always test blood work to assess immune system function and that kind of stuff. This is more from the functional side. So the reason that the hormone panel is necessary, because when we have really low estrogen, it will worsen the vaginal epithelium and that integrity, and we need the estrogen for the lactobacilli to thrive. This is why you see a lot of women going into perimenopause and starting to experience UTIs and different bladder infections and all of that, because the estrogen is no longer there to help balance the beneficial bacteria, and essentially, which is why HRT could be super beneficial for those components. But the other issue that we tend to see in the younger women is high estrogen will often feed those infections. So my women with endometriosis, a lot of them have some kind of BV, candida, gut microbiome, all of that stuff. We also really like to look at the nutritional markers and the mitochondrial support, because if that methylation isn't working, if that mitochondria is overburdened and you're starting to slam the body with all of these herbs that are going to produce a die-off effect essentially, or even things like antibiotics, if the elimination channels aren't open, so the gut is not moving properly, inflammation is too high, and now you just demand the body to start killing, we can often create a really big mess as well. So every protocol for us is personalized. We have themes that we follow, which I will share with you, but everything is personalized. And I just say this because I'm not here to gatekeep anything. I just think that medicine is individual. You have to look at the person sitting in front of you. You have to understand their history, their environment, their stress levels, what access they have to the food, to the water, to the supplements, and work with that. If I just try to curate this perfect protocol that's going to work for everybody, it tends to work for some people and it doesn't work for others. And what I hate is when people say, well, natural medicine didn't work for me. What does that mean? Mother Nature is that's the planet Earth that you're living on. If it doesn't work for you, then what are we talking about here? So having nutritional and mitochondrial markers and methylation is really important. And then obviously we want to make sure that we retest after we initiate treatments. So when we are talking about mild BV, usually 6 weeks of treatment is enough. This is not 6 weeks of antibiotics. This is usually, to be honest, most of our BV and AV cases, we do not use antibiotics unless AV or BV is also being driven by things like ureaplasma, in which case it is super beneficial to have the antibiotics because everything is just going to go a lot faster. But we're talking about specific antimicrobial herbs that you need to take for a minimum of 6 weeks, and usually vaginal suppositories as well. So then we can make sure that we're actually address the infection properly. And I've had women who needed up to 12 weeks and even longer, but then we had to take certain breaks because it was just too much for the body. As we get rid of this infection, there's a big energetic and spiritual shift that also happens. Because when the pathogen is so interwoven into your personality and into your life, as it starts to leave, you almost have to find yourself and who you are. And this is where I see women change their careers. I see women change their relationship with their partner or their family members, or, they finally are able to process some of the traumas. It's really powerful. And I think this is when I say the conventional system have oversimplified what BV really means. This is what I mean by that. They just say, take the antibiotics and the probiotics and it's good. Can I talk to the actual pathogen and understand how it's interwoven into your system and how deep it actually goes and what else is going on? Because sometimes that BV is the loudest one. It's the thing that's screaming the most at you, but there's actually deeper things that are going on that's keeping that BV. And again, I'll talk to you in a second about some specific patient cases. So here's our approach, the 5 pillars that we see really good success with in our practice. And I think just we'll show you a little bit more how taking antibiotics and then followed by probiotics is oversimplified. So the first 5 pillars, they're not in any particular order. And I think we try to include all 5 pillars in one protocol. But again, we just personalize it to each individual based on their lab testing. So biofilm disruption is really, really important, especially for BV, because the biofilm will protect the bacteria from herbal and pharmaceuticals. You have to break up the biofilms so then you can get the bugs out. Especially things like Gardnerella has a lot of biofilm and a lot of resistance, which is why it keeps coming back, that recurrent infection. And one of my cases, it's like she just kept having an infection, and then every time she would take an antibiotic, she would have to follow it up with probiotics, but then some kind of candida treatment because she would wipe out all the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. But then candida is back and that BV is still there because the biofilm was hiding it. So again, we want to understand what we're really dealing with, but biofilm disruption is really, really important. And it could be as simple as we use a lot of proteolytic enzymes in the practice, but it could be as simple as glutathione or NAC. Even something like boric acid also helps with that, but biofilm disruption is really, really important. Then the killing herbs. You obviously need something that's going to kill, and you need it at the right dose, and you need to make sure that those herbs actually work. So we try everything on ourselves in practice before we recommend it to patients, because not any single product is made the same, even not, let's say it's a trusted company. I don't love their berberine. It doesn't work. It makes me sick. It makes me nauseous. Versus a berberine from Thorne is going to work really well. So you want to choose the herbs based on the organism profile from the microbiome test. For example, for BV, it's anaerobic. We see a really good combo with berberine and alamax. That works. We also will use something like microbiome, and that will have some oregano. And again, it kind of depends on what's going on with the gut. For AV, berberine and alamax also work. Sometimes you need something stronger and more specific, like the oregano oil, sometimes some calendula, sometimes some Oregon grape, some uva ursi, sometimes some myrrh. So it really depends on everything else that's going on. But we hit our people pretty hard. And, in terms of the specific dosages, we don't just do the killing. We're breaking it up. We're killing, and then we're going to really help to support the drainage, the binders, and inflammation, and all that good stuff. You need vaginal suppositories for most of these. There is some vaginal suppositories like Alamax we use by Biomedica, which is a product out in Australia. It is the only one. I do not recommend, please don't take this as medical advice, but I do not recommend any other one because you will do some damage, but it is very effective against the gram-positive aerobes. Boric acid can also be really supportive here, and we tend to do like 7 to 10 days of boric acid, and then sometimes 7 to 21 days of the Alamax vaginally on top of the oral killing herbs as well, so then you're getting that local support. You can also make your own suppositories. Because I'm virtual, I haven't had I'll make some things myself and I'm testing some stuff out. But, I am always looking on the lookout for some suppositories that can be made, and then they can be a little bit more specific. So let's say for AV, there's a lot of inflammation. You can put things like calendula in some other herbs to just, even slippery to just help soothe that tissue while also providing some healing and antimicrobial properties. I think you need to be on a binder. That's our fourth pillar. Basically, you want to make sure you have something that clears that dead bacteria and toxins during the die-off. And those are usually taken away from other supplements and meals. We do have some kind of methylation and mitochondrial support. And again, that's all based on testing, whether that's B2 and B3 or B6 or B9 or choline or glutathione or glycine, molybdenum, minerals for energy, all that kind of stuff. It's all very much personalized to you, and everyone is different. Those are our 5 pillars. So we have something that disrupts the biofilm disruptions, the killing herbs, the vaginal suppositories, the binders, and the methylation support. And then we do have some supporting supplements, and that really depends on the person. So let's say they have a lot of leaky gut, we have gut lining support. If there's more mitochondrial damage, we'll bring in big things like the urolithin A or an MD to essentially help and support that mitochondrial function and get rid of that infection. The last component is really looking at the mental and emotional component of BV. So when we see women with BV, they often have a lot of brain fog, they have low energy, they just don't feel right, there's a lot of shame, they feel uncomfortable. They feel very disconnected from their body or their sexuality. You're often afraid, or you don't want to have sex because you either don't want to pass it on, or it's uncomfortable for you, or you don't want to get it from your partner. Their home life often feels cluttered and chaotic. They just don't feel like they have control of those components. Just things continue to come up. And it matters because it's not just like some woo-woo medicine, but it's when I sit in front of my patients, I'm just looking at what is presenting, and I'm looking at them as a whole. And I think that this chronic inflammation and toxins and dysbiosis really do impact your brain and your mood and your nervous system. And so as the body clears the infections and reorganizes itself, you often see this urge in women to want to clean and organize, start to set boundaries. And we really work with our patients to do that because it tells us that the system is reintegrating, and we're seeing that in the lab values, but we're also rebuilding their terrain. And I think the microbiome is all about the terrain. When we have a lot of pathogenic load, we feel cluttered because it's not human cells, it's these pathogens that are really running the show, and they're very depleting. We need some pathogens in our microbiomes, but our good microbiome needs to run the show. So I always say human cells are happy cells, and really it's not like human cells are still bacteria, like we're all just walking bacteria. We need beneficial bacteria to help us feel happy, to help us have dopamine and serotonin levels, and to process hormones like estrogen, and even testosterone and progesterone appropriately, and to help us digest our food and make antioxidants for us. When we test the microbiomes, especially when we look at BV, usually the gut and even the uterine is just so off, it makes sense why the person feels so cluttered. I don't see a lot of women taking antibiotics for 7 days, followed by 30 days of probiotics, have this really big shift because they barely touch the tip of the iceberg. This is 6, 8, 12 weeks, and sometimes longer, depending on how interwoven that pathogen is into you. That's when we want to see, in practice. So let's talk how it's connected to your fertility, okay? My hope is by now you're like, yeah, okay, it makes sense that it's linked. And I hate it when you go to the doctor and you say, I have this issue and I also am struggling to conceive. Do you think it has anything to do with it? Because deep down in your gut, you're like, this has to have something to do with it. And your doctor goes, no, it doesn't. Just take these antibiotics and then try to conceive and you should be fine. And it's years of that and nothing has happened. So I want you to listen to your gut. And I do think that the same microbiome and immune patterns that drive the bacterial vaginosis or the aerobic vaginitis will absolutely affect your cervical mucus, which then affects the sperm survival, which then also affects the uterine environment, which then affects implantation and then increases the miscarriage risk. So nothing in the body works in isolation. If there's a huge dysbiosis in the vaginal microbiome, it's likely happening everywhere else too, which means your immune system is up and regulated. That means your inflammation is elevated. That means your nutrients are dysregulated. It all works together. And if you think about when we're growing the baby in our uterus, that's our microbiome that the first introduction for the baby. And so we have this opportunity to set the microbiome to be really healthy instead of, pathogenic. So I think if you're trying to conceive naturally, or especially if you're spending money on things like IUI or IVF, you have to make sure that this BV or AV is under control. If it keeps showing up, don't think of it as like a side quest. It's central. It is you have to deal with it because it's going to prolong your journey so much more. And sometimes what I like to say is go slow to go fast, because if you go, well, maybe I can just take these antibiotics and my doctor says that in 7 days I can clear it up and I'll just take some probiotics and I'm good. What I see is women doing that for 2, 3, 5, 10 years and they're still not good. So to me, taking 3 months or even 6 months or 9 months to take a step back, to really look at your terrain, to really optimize your health in your vaginal microbiome and uterine microbiome and gut microbiome. So then not only is your chance of getting pregnant and staying pregnant is much higher, but the health of that baby and the foundation that you're setting for that baby is going to be so different because of the microbes that you have now, the levels of nutrients, the inflammation, the blood sugar that's now regulated. To me, that's not a hard decision to make. So let me talk a little bit about some patients that are coming to mind. So one of my patients, she was actually a practitioner. She had some vaginal odor symptoms, but nothing really bad. She had 2 miscarriages in a row. She didn't want to wait for a third. So because that's what the rules are in the conventional system, you need to wait for 3 miscarriages before you get any kind of testing. She had other tests done, but we looked at her vaginal microbiome, amongst, of course, other things. And she had BV. She had almost AV, but it wasn't super bad. She had really high overgrowth of Enterococcus facialis. So we put her on a protocol for 6 weeks. She retested. It came clear. She literally got pregnant within a couple of months. That stuck, and then she just gave birth at the end of last year. And this is a patient that I actually got to meet in person, and she was like, hey, I'm super grateful because I think this was a big missing piece. So even though she was already a practitioner, she was already taking care of her gut. She was, eating well, drinking all the clean water, taking all the supplements, et cetera, she literally needed a little bit of help to clear this infection. And, voila. And her partner was treated at the same time. And obviously he didn't even object to it. He was like, yep, let's do it. So I also have, currently a client, she had a miscarriage. And then when we tested her BV levels were just through the roof. Now we're working on baby number 2. Baby number 1 came fairly quickly, even though with a endometriosis case, she did have some complications during pregnancy, but everything turned out great. The baby is great. Mama is healthy. So now trying for baby number 2. Basically, we kind of went in and go, well, the symptoms are not there. We didn't want to retest. We just kind of made that decision. Let's not retest and let's just try. She conceived within, I think it was second try. She noticed the change in her vaginal microbiome around week 5 or 6. And what I mean by that is she just started to get some odor. She started to get some discharge that just didn't feel right. And then sure enough, when she went to ultrasound on week 7, 8, There was no heartbeat. So it's unfortunate, but then of course, what do we do now? Let's look at the vaginal microbiome. That BV infection is really high. Let's treat the partner properly this time. Let's make sure you're treated properly. Let's retest before we start trying again. So then we don't repeat that mistake. So this is what I say, like, go slow to go fast. Sometimes we go, I just want to do it. I don't want to retest. I don't want to wait for another month. I'm just ready. And don't get me wrong, I totally get that, and I think sometimes when things feel good, we just want to go and start trying. And the more that I do this, the more I realize that we really have to just lean into the data, because the data is what gives us confidence to say, let's do it. And there's obviously still no guarantees, but you just feel much more confident going into it. And I do see it work out better when we have more data behind us. So here's what I want you to remember. BV is not just about vaginal dysbiosis. It is a snapshot of your whole system. Your gut function, your immune system function, your nervous system function, even your relationship, and yes, your fertility. So if you've been stuck getting recurrent BVs, you're tired of throwing antibiotics at it, and you're concerned that this is exactly what's causing your fertility struggles, then this is what we do inside the Maximize Fertility program. If you want us to look at your case, and you are tired of putting all those little pieces together on your own, just click the link below and fill out an application to work with us. We will review your story. If we can help, we'll show you what that looks like. And if we can't, we'll make sure to point you in the right direction so you still have your next step in your fertility journey figured out. So thank you again for being here. I hope you found this helpful. I appreciate you for tuning in, downloading the podcast, and I'll see you next time.